Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. The first item on the agenda is a 47th special session. Need a motion to go into special session, please.
So moved.
Moved by Emily,
Second.
second by Shelley. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Okay, motion carries. It sounds like 5-0. Can't really tell, because some people don't want to listen about it. Okay, moving on. Approval of an ordinance, Kensington Commercial Quitclaim.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move for the approval of an ordinance to convey 2,765 square feet of city property to Kensington Commercial Center LLC. The property in question was acquired by the city during the widening of Eastern Boulevard, but has been determined to no longer be needed for a public purpose.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Approval of resolution, execution of commercial lease agreement with Ayahana Incorporated, doing business as Hana Thai Dining, for the property located at 40 North Potomac Street, Hagerstown, Maryland.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move for mayor and city council to approve the attached resolution authorizing the execution of a commercial lease agreement with Ayahana Incorporated, operated by Zahana Homes, a.k.a. Zahana Pakpum, for the property located at 40 North Potomac Street in Hagerstown, Maryland. The lease will be between the city of Hagerstown and Ayahana Incorporated and shall be in effect from August 1, 2018 to July 31, 2021.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Ratification of emergency procurement, emergency demolition of 322.5 to 330 East Franklin Street, Hagerstown, Maryland.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move for the ratification of an emergency procurement for the demolition of 322.5 to 330 East Franklin Street. The building had collapsed on the center foundation wall, affecting all 6 units of the structure and a threat to public safety and a neighboring property. Staff ordered the immediate demolition of the structure to eliminate the threat to public safety. Adams Demolition of Hagerstown, Maryland completed the demolition work. The cost of the demolition work performed by Adams Demolition was $60,500. The work performed at this property has been paid from the property abatement account.
Second.
Discussion.
I have just a couple of questions. The property abatement account, I'm not familiar with that. Where is that? What-
That's where we put the money into the budget for demolitions, and then we also have money, it's in Kathy's department, somewhere in one of her departments. And then we also have money out of CDBG for demolitions as well.
Okay. How do we tap the CDBG money to do this?
The property would have to qualify through CDBG, and neither one of these were
Qualify.
through CDBG.
Okay.
No.
Also noted in there, the city had taken the owners of that structure to court for failure to demolish it after the first collapse 6 years ago. And there was no action, or we've never gotten anything from
No.
that. And any potential of getting any of that 60,000 back?
I'd have to defer with legal and say, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, it seems a shame because we having to pay a structural engineer every year to make sure after the first collapse for 6 years that it wasn't a public nuisance. And then I'm sure that the property abatement funds somehow come out of the general fund
It's
eventually.
general fund,
Okay.
correct, yes.
I can answer one as far as the owners of the property and the repayment of it. 4 of the 6 owners have agreed to court, in court to pay us back for the demolition. It was 6 individual different owners for this property, so it made it into a very complex case. And out of those, 4 which are owned by banks, and they've agreed to pay us back for those. The other one may or may not, I'm not 100% sure. The other one's in a legal situation where it got sold at a tax sale, and then the owners are trying to reclaim it. So I'm not too sure on where that one stands.
Okay, so that we do stand to recoup some of that. Okay, great.
Anything else? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Ratification of emergency procurement, emergency demolition of 206-208 Jonathan Street, Hagerstown, Maryland.
Mayor, hereby move for the ratification of emergency procurement for the demolition of 206-208 Jonathan Street. Building sustained significant water damage due to a deteriorated roof and was deemed to be unstable by a professional engineer. Staff ordered the immediate demolition of the structure to eliminate the threat to public safety. Adams Demolition of Hagerstown, Maryland completed the demolition work. Cost of demolition work performed by Adams Demolition was $20,000. Work performed at this property has been paid by the property abatement account.
Second.
Discussion.
Just a comment, and to follow up on the one we just did, you know, while we read these approvals, you know, I think it's good to give folks an awareness, because you hear quite often from people, you know, why is this building still standing, you know, why does that place look like it does? You know, in the first case, which we just approved, you read where it's 6 different structures, 6 different owners, 4 of which are banks, you know, and 2 of which you have communications with, you know, and we're sort of like the bystander here, if you will, you know, in a multi-car wreck where, you know, the individuals associated with the cause of that don't have adequate insurance to cover everybody that ends up getting hit. I mean, that's about how this reads, and then you read the second case, which we're about to vote on. Again, folks at home don't hear this part, but you read, this property has been unoccupied for several years. The owner of 208 Jonathan has been deceased since 1949 with no claim to the estate, and the owner of 206 Jonathan Street is in Texas in a senior living center, and you know, has agreed to communication to attempt to make payments. And you know, the reality is, we may never see that money either. And I don't think that's a horrible thing, but I think it lends credence to our cause to be setting aside money to start to demolish some of these structures, because they have just gone on in this manner for decades in all parts of the community. And you know, we've been attempting to sort of work with owners to get them fixed. And I think we've come to the realization that for a lot of these, that just isn't going to be the result. And they've got to come down, because they've been sitting that way 10, 15, 20 years, and there is no salvaging them at this point. And so I think it's good for folks to hear that these aren't items that we can just simply do all of them at once overnight. Every one of them costs $50,000 to $100,000. Every one of them have legal recourse and ramifications and negotiations that have to happen. And while we'd all like to see them go away tomorrow, you know, this is certainly a good start.
I am curious, especially when I hear about the Jonathan Street ownership issue, if we have developed any thought processes about what the next step is with these properties.
Like, who ends up owning them? We
Right,
demolished them.
well, and what's gonna happen to them over the next 12 to 24 months? When, if it looks like it's
Right, weeds
just
start to
basically,
grow,
yeah,
and- yeah, I mean, that stuff's gonna
and
happen.
it looks like there's stone there versus dirt, so who's gonna mow them, who's gonna take care of them, what are we gonna do? I don't know, I don't expect anybody to have those answers tonight, but I would think that that's the next step in long-term planning, is what do we do with properties that we can't obtain title to? And is the way to obtain title through eminent domain? I just don't know, but otherwise, when I hear about that title situation, if we don't take a proactive step, that property is just gonna sit there forever.
In limbo.
And then
Nobody
we're-
wants to claim it.
And then we're gonna be there maintaining it in the same manner that we tore it down, by
Well,
abatements.
One thing, I always thought it would be nice if we tore them down to be able to create green space or playgrounds or even parking, off-street parking, but you bring up a good point. We don't really possibly have clear title to
No, we don't.
No.
To any of them.
those parcels where those houses sit.
And then,
So we
of
can't
course, if
do
we
it.
take title, then we're losing any chance of taxation.
That way,
Well,
I'm pretty sure we haven't collected any
No.
tax on those properties.
Well, the issue of
But that's
Franklin
part of what we're
Street,
trying to do
yeah,
with
the
the
issue of
tax
Franklin Street
sale
may be very
property.
different than the issue in Jonathan, but on Jonathan, you're never gonna get anything there, and then you hear Kirsten's facts, and you understand, I mean, you can't say anything nasty about these folks, one of them's dead, and the other's beyond being able to deal with it, so it's gonna be up to us to deal with. And if there's still at least somebody living, it may be easier to get it done now than after he passes away. And then we have an estate to deal with out of Texas potentially. It's a mess.
Is there a way to I'm sure we have an accounting of what the back taxes are on that property that have not been paid, and we've got an accounting of what it cost us to demo it because it was a public health nuisance. Is that justification for taking it by eminent domain at that point? Or is that just catch as catch can in the court?
I don't know, but in the same respect as you mentioned, a tax sale may be the simplest way to
And
obtain it.
that's what we're, I mean, that's the process we're trying to.
Yeah, that's probably
come
the
up
You
with.
quickest,
get back
simplest,
taxes over to the
cheapest
county
way.
and the city, and then
Right.
you work out that whole thing, right?
And that's a process we want to
Yep.
get to, because there's, there's other vacant lots and there's other
Right.
properties in that same situation. Yep.
All right, anybody else?
To echo Christian's point, I think it is important that we fund it and that we do take these down, because all they're doing is dragging down the property values of everything else in the neighborhood. And it would be much better to have a playground or a parking lot there, I think.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Approval of open containers exemption, Maryland Theater, wind down events.
Mr. Mayor, I hereby move that mayor and council approve an exemption from the City of Hagerstown's open containers regulation under section 173-6 of the Code of the City of Hagerstown for the Maryland Theater wind down events on July 27th, August 10th, September 21st, and October 5th, 2018 at University Plaza.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Approval of on-call electrical maintenance services contract 7/1/18 to 6/30/19.
Mr. Mayor, we move from Mayor and Council to authorize and approve MEC Inc. as the City of Hagerstown's on-call electrical contractor for various buildings, facilities within the City of Hagerstown on an as-needed basis for projects under $25,000. The departments that will be utilizing these services are as follows: Parks, Public Works, Utilities, Water and Wastewater, Fire, and Police. These services were offered through bid proposal in June 2018, Proposal P1666.18. MEC Inc. was awarded the bid. Contract term is from July 1, 2018 through June 30, 2019, with the possibility of up to 5 additional consecutive one-year extensions, subject to the mutual consent of the City of Hagerstown and MEC Inc. MEC Inc.'s pricing is as follows: regularly hourly rate 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m., $55 per hour, Monday through Friday. After-hours rate Monday through Friday is $82.50 per hour. Weekend rates are $82.50 per hour. Holiday rates $110 per hour, and material markup on supplies is 10%.
Second.
Any discussion? So I actually do have one question. The Monday through Friday regular hourly rate from 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. of $55 per hour. And this, we're talking about things that affect City of Hagerstown buildings or departments, right?
Restrooms, parks, concession stands, things that come up in regular building maintenance. Yes, we don't have staff.
Oh, okay. That was my question.
Yes,
All right.
right. Because the electricians in the light department they fall under different regulations. And we have one electrician in Public Works who's really 80% of his time is signals and traffic. So he has like 20%. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
Good enough. All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries 5-0. Okay, we'll move out of the 47th special session, the work session. First item is the preliminary agenda review for our meeting next Tuesday, the 31st at 7 p.m. Mr. Elshire will have the invocation, we'll do the pledge to the flag, we'll do announcements. Work sessions in August are August 7th, 14th, and 21st are all work sessions at 4 p.m. And August 28th is a regular session at 7 p.m. We'll have citizen comments, city administrators' comments, we'll have mayor and council comments. We won't have any minutes to approve at this point. Moving on to the consent agenda, as always, if there's a question, please stop me. Under IT support services, GIS system, annual maintenance renewal, ESRI, Redlands, California, $35,000. Time and attendance maintenance support renewal, IntelliTime, Santa Ana, California, $53,692.98. Under police, the annual software maintenance from Keystone, Maple Shade, New Jersey, $88,174. Under Public Works, Roslyn Building Roof and Window Replacement, A.D. Ralph and Sons, Hagerstown, Maryland, $149,957.15. Under Utilities, wastewater is rebuild, update flight mixer units in the WWTP, apparatus repair and engineering of Hagerstown, Maryland, $37,022. Underwater, we have a Ford F-750 4x4 with a crane, Keystone Ford out of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, $188,273. Underwater, we have large meters, Core and Main, Martinsburg, West Virginia for $32,380. Underwater, we have 30G compact excavator with attachments from Jesco of Frederick, Maryland, $40,065.80. Underwater, we have Ridge Runner Hillside Mower from Alamo Industrial, Seguin, Texas, for $43,148. Under unfinished business, there is none. Under new business, we have the introduction of an ordinance, land transfer 52 East Baltimore Street. Approval of public art across Maryland grants. The approval of a liability and property insurance for fiscal year 2019 for $391,322. The approval of Munis Financial System annual maintenance, support, and renewal for $214,364.38. And the approval of grant agreements for the UIP and subrecipient agreements with the Board of Education and the Maryland Theater.
What we handed to you tonight is we do have two of those ready, and those are for the Maryland Theater. So they will actually be two separate items, and those should have been either added to your packet or given to you. Those are for the Maryland Theater expansion. One is for the grant agreement, and then one is for the subrecipient agreement. We have these ready. We may not have the Board of Education ones ready for next week, but there is a possibility we would. Okay? So that would end up being 4 items if we do.
Any questions from council on the consent agenda? Okay. Next up, one of our favorite subjects, policy on dogs in City Park. Rodney.
Favorite subject. I understand some of you got some feedback on where the dogs are allowed to be in City Park. If you remember back in September, for those of you who were part of the council then, back in September, we increased the restriction area. So on the screen is City Park. The areas in red are where dogs are allowed to go. The area that used to be where dogs were allowed is along the Virginia Avenue side, and there at the bottom of the screen, they were allowed to go along the lake. But that was changed to the way it is here now. If we want to go back to, I understand that's the issue, is where the dogs are allowed along that east side along Virginia Avenue. We have a couple ways of dealing with that, and Mark has a couple ideas that we could go from that to something more like this, where the red area would be, dogs would be allowed along the lake on that side. So, Mark, you want to tell them about the one idea you have?
Well, one idea would be, this is in front of the old restrooms, the old women's restroom. I would take those 2 trees out and cut that wall and go across there, which would, we could go towards Park Circle with a walkway, and it would connect at the bottom of the hill where people have to walk up that hill now to go on the Virginia Avenue and then go back into the park. That would be a section of walkway across that area that would connect those two, so they wouldn't have to go back up on Virginia Avenue again. That would be the one aspect of solving it.
And in plan view, it's shown there in yellow. It's just, it's about, what, 150 feet long?
About 150 feet.
Right. The other option would be to,
Cross the bridge right there where the yellow starts, walk up behind the new bathrooms, then go back out through the main causeway, and then turn right going south, which would get you back on that path along across from the concession stand again.
Do we have a cost estimate on any of this?
We'll do the work all in-house, so.
It would
it's just
come out
gonna
of
be
our
our
operating
materials.
budget.
Be our materials.
Is there one that you think works better than the other?
Well, putting the dogs back across the causeway, it just would create issues with people probably walking in more so than shooting straight across the causeway. And the one part about putting that section in the proposed trail, it always seemed like there should have been a walkway, probably went through there at one time anyway, just to connect that whole side of the, that way you could go the whole way along Virginia Avenue without having to go back up on Virginia Avenue. It just seemed like it made sense to do that.
I'm good with that.
I am
Didn't
too.
we have concerns at one point in time about the waterfowl and the dogs, and, which was another reason why we pushed people up on Virginia Avenue as opposed to walking along that path? Do we not care about that
We
anymore?
do allow them on the north side near Key Street. We allow them where the Octagon Pavilion is. So right now, there is some access to the lake.
The problem is that people are cutting into the park there, which is in, like, actual into the park. That's why we changed it from the get-go. I think this solves that problem, or at least helps to.
It also keeps the waterfowl kind of congregate up on the wall by the lake there, and this puts the traffic back out toward the embankment away from where they are. On that side by Virginia Avenue.
Guys are all okay with this or
I'm
not?
confused when you say that, because I walk this all the time. You say that this pushes the walker away from,
Well, right now, if they were to walk up that sidewalk, it's right there on the edge of the lake, and you've
the
got a lot
Virginia
of
Avenue
these-
sidewalk,
Huh?
the Virginia Avenue sidewalk.
Oh, no, if you did this red pattern here, and you let dogs walk,
That's what we're proposing to do, is let them walk through this area.
Right.
This
Right now,
entire stretch is exactly what
but
you're
not
saying.
cross the bridge.
Right.
Is that, were we worried about the waterfowl, if you cross the bridge and you go up around
On
to
that,
hit the
inst-
causeway again, in there, because there's a lot that congregate in that area.
Right now, the dogs are restricted to just Virginia Avenue sidewalk. They're not allowed in the park on that side if you follow the signs. So this is allowing them down to the lake on that side.
I think this solves the concerns of the
Yeah.
neighbors.
Of being on Virginia Avenue.
I mean, I'm not aware of a groundswell of concerns of neighbors. I'm aware of a couple of people that don't want to walk on Virginia Avenue, and that's fine. I mean, there are dozens of people that do it every day. But I definitely think it changes the dynamic along this stretch. Even if you had the trail obviously makes it better because it keeps that crossover from happening. Because a lot of folks, when they get to that crossover, take their kids into the tot lot and then you get that. But, I mean, this entire stretch, as Austin points out, is heavily, inundated with waterfowl. I mean, it just is. And, one of the reasons I walk on Virginia Avenue is to have that separation, because you have any number of families that are going both directions on a skinny trail through this area. Unlike the other parts of the park, if you walk on the upper side, even if you come down around this side where the road is, you have the ability to separate yourself. And in this stretch, you have the embankment, the water, and the trail. And there's zero ability to separate yourself, especially if you're going in opposing directions or if you're coming up on
That
somebody.
looks pretty big to me, what you just had there. Look at that. I mean, that looks pretty wide. It looks a lot wider than Virginia Avenue.
Mhm. That's why the folks walk up on Virginia Avenue in that area, to sort of avoid.
You don't think that's dangerous to walk along Virginia Avenue with a stroller and a dog?
And I've been doing it for
I know, but
20 years, so
I understand that. You don't feel,
Daniil's still pushing you.
I haven't been hit yet.
I don't know, to me, it feels like that would be safer to have, I mean, I understand the waterfowl, I don't know, I understand.
Well, I mean, the ordinance is that dogs have to be on a leash, so they need
That's
to be
right.
under control, so, I mean, unless they're like 2 inches from a duck and they lunge and get it, you know, it's not really
And
gonna
that,
happen.
those types of instances do occur in the same period. I've seen this at least a half a dozen times, where then you have an adult and let's say 2 children, and the person who is in control of the dog, but the waterfowl stir it, and then it creates a tightness of space. I mean, you can go out there and watch it yourself. It creates a tightness of space through this stretch right here, right along the waterway from those 2 points. And it's because you have this embankment here, and then you have the water, and that's it. There's no sort of space to get out of the way.
What, you have to deal with the consequences of this, so do you think it's fine to do the trail? Do you think it would solve the concerns, or do you think it's gonna be a bigger headache on you and your staff?
I think it's gonna keep people from crossing that bridge and trying to go deeper into the park and come around. Actually, I think that the trail should be put in there regardless of what we do, because I think it makes the park more complete. I think it's something that should have probably been in there for years.
Okay.
And if there is an issue, I guess we could revisit it
Yeah,
and retake
that's
it
my
back out.
bottom line. If there's an issue, we can say, well.
Okay, we tried it, right,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't mind that.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Nearly as much as more than that as we did the construction.
Talking all the time.
Okay, next up, who we've all been waiting to hear, Victus Sportsplex Study Presentation.
With me is Brian Conley. He's the founder and principal of Victus Advisors. And Brian's here to present his Phase 1 market feasibility study for a potential indoor sports complex. Again, this was his Phase 1 study, and really the bottom line goal here was to determine whether or not there's a need for such a facility in our community. And I think through the many people he's talked to, the answer to that is resoundingly yes. But I'll let him go through that and tell us about the findings that you have, and then we have some other things to go over after that, and give you the opportunity to ask questions. So, Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you, Rodney. I'll go ahead and jump in. To start off, I just wanted to walk quickly through our study approach. So, as Rodney said, this is our Phase 1 market demand study for an indoor sports facility. So the boxes around the top, the black and red ones, are all the different research inputs that we've gathered over the last really 10 weeks or so. So we've done demographic and socioeconomic analysis, analysis of what sports programs and facilities are already in the community. And then we did a pretty wide sports community engagement effort. We met with local stakeholders for one-on-one interviews. We did focus groups with sports leaders throughout the community. We did an online survey with local sports participants, primarily parents, coaches, people involved in the sports community. And then we also did a series of telephone interviews with regional and national sports event organizers. Using all those research inputs, we put together our recommendations for indoor sports facility demand. That's what we're presenting today, is those Phase 1 findings. We also have a proposed Phase 2 that also includes an architectural partner that would get into site analysis, some concept plans and cost estimates, as well as from our side, usage estimates for the facility, revenues and expenses, funding analysis, economic impact analysis of the new visitation that could be attracted for tournaments and that type of activity, and analysis of management operations options for the facilities. To start off, I wanted to talk a little bit about the concept of a sports tourism facility. One of the things that came up through a lot of our research and interviews was the idea of, is this a local use facility or is this a sports tourism driver? And sports tourism is really a phrase that's popped up in the last 10 years. And it means regional or national travel to observe or participate in a sporting event. What that really means is primarily youth sports. Youth sports, club team tournaments, showcases for college, things like that. So the primary sports tourism traveler, when you think about sports tourism, is a family in the minivan. They typically drive within a 3 to 6 hour range for participatory sports tournaments, youth and amateur sports. And from our best practices, what we've seen is that the communities that are most successful with developing and creating youth and amateur sports facilities, it's not necessarily a choice between is this only local use, is this sports tourism driver. They're able to sort of divide the calendar so that during the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you're hosting local practices, local leagues, local games. And then on the weekends, that's when you have the tournament activity. That's when families travel for events. Some of that is bringing in outside tournaments. Some of that is also giving your local groups the opportunity to start some of their own tournaments. So in terms of the sports tourism industry, it's a rapidly growing industry. And typically when you talk about the impacts of sports tourism, you're talking about hotel nights, visitor spending in restaurants, retail, local entertainment and cultural attractions. And that little chart there at the bottom shows the total visitor spending associated with sports tourism has increased significantly by about 26% since 2012 and continues to grow. One of the things we look at in all our studies is, what is it that drives sports tourism to a market? And 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's kind of prioritizing the factors that we hear from talking to events all over the country, sports events all over the country. Number 1, you have to have the facility. If you don't have a facility that meets what they're looking for that tournament, you're off the list. Once you have that facility, then these other factors come into play. So proximity and access, typically thinking about that 3 to 6 hour drive range. Other family tourism amenities. A lot of people sort of combine vacations with sports travel. They'll bring, little brother's playing in a tournament, big brother comes along, and wants to be able to go do some other things while his brother's playing in the tournament, or in the evening the family wants to go do something. So having those other attractions is helpful. And then reputation. If you're known as a region that's a good host for these types of events, people care about sports, people show up, people know that you're there, they offer discounts in restaurants, things like that. So in terms of looking at Hagerstown, specifically indoor sports, there's a clear lack of indoor sports tourism caliber venues. What that typically means is you have quantities of a type of sports amenity. So you have 4 or more basketball courts in one place. You have 4 or more fields that are high quality fields in one place. When it comes to ice, typically you need 2 ice sheets in one building to even be able to bid on figure skating events and hockey tournaments and things like that. So Hagerstown has a clear lack of indoor sports tourism caliber venues. And it's worth noting that most of these sports tourism venues we see all over the country and work on all over the country are that hybrid of on the weekends is where most of your tournaments are held. We see indoor facilities that host anywhere from 25 to 40 weekend tournaments a year if they're operated well. And then local use and practices and games and things like that typically occur during the week because tournament activity doesn't occur during the week for the most part. The idea is that Hagerstown has a lot of these things in place already. It has the proximity and access, being at the intersection of I-80 and I-71. We calculated more than 50 million people that live within a 5-hour drive range of Hagerstown, including some of the largest markets in the country. Hagerstown has affordable, family-friendly hotels that people want to stay at. There's numerous historical tourism attractions and outdoor activities in the region. And then from a reputation standpoint, we met with the Maryland Sports Commission, and they said that Hagerstown has a reputation as a family-friendly travel destination that's convenient to major markets. And that when you're there, especially if you're a sports event, like I think cycling is coming soon, it provides more of an outdoor, small-town feel if you're coming from Washington or Baltimore, places like that. So the things farther down the list are in place. It's just a matter of having the facility to be able to attract those events. One of the things we looked at too is where is your sports community going now? So we talked about there's this lack of indoor sports facilities. So they have to travel to, not in this case, not just participate in tournaments, but also travel for a lot of their local use. So as you can see, a large number of the facilities they're going to now are along that I-70, I-270 corridor towards Baltimore and DC. Some of these are, smaller indoor turf facilities like in Frederick. So a lot of that's weekday travel that your sports community is leaving to use the facilities like that. But a lot of these are also larger, multi-field, multi-court type complexes. So we quantified here, the number of soccer, or we typically call rectangular fields, multi-use fields that can be used for more than just soccer. And basketball courts, which are typically also volleyball courts and other indoor uses. There's, in terms of indoor soccer groups, a lot of them are going to Frederick, Maryland for, just practices and games and things like that, Winchester as well. And then the other end of the spectrum, Maryland Soccerplex in Boyd's, Maryland, is a massive facility with 24 fields and 8 basketball courts. But sort of in between, there's this sweet spot of facilities that feature anywhere from 2 to 6 fields and anywhere from 3 to 10 basketball courts. And that's what we tend to see for markets this size in terms of having a facility that accommodates local use and also attracts sports tourism and the impacts associated with that, is things in that 4 to 6 court range. And it's worth noting too that when we talk about sports tourism versus local use, artificial turf only indoor field facilities tend to be more of a local use amenity. So especially here where you already have people leaving to go use other communities' indoor turf facilities during the week. But when it comes to court facilities, they can be used for basketball, volleyball, futsal, which is a version of indoor soccer. We see field hockey using them, things like that. Cheer, dance, wrestling tournaments. And this was confirmed in our meeting with the Maryland Sports Commission. They said the primary driver for sports tourism is indoor court facilities, hard surface, typically a hardwood floor facility. So based upon all of our research, our recommendation for what there's demand for in Hagerstown is the development of an indoor multi-court tournament caliber sports facility. So we recommend at least 4 to 6 basketball courts, which are usually convertible to even more volleyball courts because the volleyball courts are smaller. We gave a little bit of a range because ultimately what can fit will depend on the site and the way it lays out on the site. Column-free hard court surfaces that could be used for basketball, volleyball, futsal, field hockey, cheer, dance, wrestling, things like that. Again, during the week, these courts could be used primarily for local practices and games. One of the things we heard over and over, especially from basketball and volleyball groups, is they have a very hard time finding any gym space at all, and many of them are actually limiting the number of participants they can take on because they don't have the gym space to even conduct practices. And again, the weekend's dedicated to sports tournament activity. So indoor multi-court facilities are lacking in the area. And additionally, this type of facility could balance the seasonality of the city's current sports tourism calendar, which is mostly driven by outdoor activities in the summer at the moment, and drive some additional economic impacts in the winter and the early spring. Additionally, we found that there's demand for indoor artificial turf fields, at least 1, potentially 2, again, depending on the way it can fit on the site and what the total budget is for the facility. Each field could be utilized potentially as 1 full-length soccer lacrosse field, or a lot of them are designed that you can also play across them for youth soccer or small practices, things like that. Usually there's netting systems that can drop down. You can set up baseball batting cages. All of these facilities we're talking about are multi-use that have people in them every day. Access to indoor field space would benefit outdoor field groups, soccer, lacrosse. They could train and practice during the winter months. When weather's bad, especially early in the spring, they'd have a place to go indoors. And it would also keep a lot of your indoor soccer groups that are currently traveling from Frederick to Frederick, some as many as 3-4 times a week. It would keep them home and keep them in your community, spending money in your community. We were also asked to take an initial look at potential locations. There would be a more in-depth site analysis conducted in the second phase with our architecture and engineering partners. But we took a preliminary look at some potential locations within Hagerstown. So to start, there's some keys to what we typically look at when it comes to where you put a sports center. So these priorities are taken from our years of interviewing tournaments and events all over the country and asking about destinations and locations and what they like and what they don't. And ultimately, what are the factors they weigh when they decide where to go? This is after, of course, having the type of facility they need. So, number one and number two kind of fit together. It's this idea that you need to have a sports destination. A lot of communities are even developing sports facilities where the hotel is on site, retail is on site. You can walk to those types of amenities. And the threshold that events have in terms of, oh yeah, we'll go to this facility and then the hotels are this far away, a shopping mall is this far away. Even 5 years ago, 10 to 15 minutes was okay. And now most of them want that to at least be within a 5-minute drive, if not on site. So they want family-friendly, affordable hotels, either adjacent to or within a 5-minute drive. They want family-friendly restaurants and retail, so if you have 2 hours before a game, you can quickly go over, get something to eat, come back, that sort of thing. Ease of transportation access and parking as well, so it's not just getting to the site, having convenient access to highways, things like that, but it's also being able to park when you're there. Again, it's families traveling in the minivan, and during the week as well, it's when you hold practices and kids are showing up and parents are dropping them off or they're parking on the site. So it's very crucial that you have enough parking to park the sort of peak activity levels at the site, which could be quite a bit of parking. Safety, of course, you're talking about a lot of children and families, so must be in a safe, secure area. And then also, another factor I talked about earlier, which is if it's a multi-day tournament, they like to see that there's other attractions in the area that their families can partake in. So thinking about all those factors and then applying them to the potential locations that came up during our stakeholder interviews, and we sort of identified 4 potential sites that came up the most during our research. So the ones that came up the most were Fairgrounds Park, the idea of creating a sports destination, indoor and outdoor, at Fairgrounds Park. The Greens at Hamilton Run, which is a existing golf course that is currently the operations are subsidized by the city on an annual basis. Then downtown Hagerstown was raised by a couple of people, and that was really tied to, so many of the projects we're thinking about right now in this community are how do we redevelop downtown, how do we create growth in downtown, is a sports facility something that could fit down there, a youth and amateur sports facility. And then municipal stadium area as well. We know there's been a lot of discussion about the future of professional baseball, which is when we're not talking about professional sports with this type of facility, but there's been a lot of discussion in the community about the future of professional baseball and whether that site should remain a baseball stadium, could it be something else? So those were the 4 that came up the most, and we kind of looked at the pros and cons of each site, thinking back to what I just talked about in terms of how tournaments and users prioritize them. So Fairgrounds Park, pros would include being able to create a single indoor-outdoor sports destination. We also, in our report, have a couple secondary recommendations beyond just this indoor sports facility. One of those recommendations was, potentially adding a few more fields within the existing outdoor field infrastructure there to be able to attract more events and provide more access to the locals. So it's this idea of you already have an primarily outdoor complex, plus you have the single sheet indoor ice arena there as well. So it's one of the best practices we see across the country now is creating that kind of year-round, everyday indoor and outdoor sports destination. In terms of location, it's conveniently located between downtown Hagerstown and that east side hotel and restaurant inventory as you come into town, which could help capture positive economic impact. In terms of cons for the Fairgrounds Park, you know, there's two sites that were considered. One that we heard from people was where the grandstands are now, on sort of that upper level there. So there would be cost to demolishing that, removing that, potentially having to relocate some of the programs that are in the lower level of that. And then the second thing is, one of the other secondary recommendations we found is that there is demand for a second sheet of ice in the community, not just for local use, but also to even be able to go out and try to attract, you know, regional hockey tournaments, regional figure skating competitions, things like that. You need a second sheet of ice. So if the type of indoor facility we're talking about was placed on that site right next to, there's an open field right now right next to the existing ice complex, you know, that could potentially, or that would limit the ability for the ice arena to potentially expand in the future to have a second sheet of ice. So there could be a lost opportunity there if you use that site for, you know, just for putting, you know, like a court facility or a court and turf facility, if that makes sense. We met with the ice complex people as well. They were extremely helpful and cooperative, you know, during our study. We know that they were developing some proposals where there could potentially be a second sheet of ice there, as well as an upper level on top of that that could potentially have, you know, an artificial turf field on top of it. But, you know, having one artificial turf field on top of the ice is not necessarily the type of facility we're talking about here. And honestly, we haven't seen a model where you have the cold and damp uses combined with the dry, warmer uses that works from an engineering and a functionality standpoint. So if that's an option that we'd be asked to consider in phase 2, we'd want to have our architectural engineering partners look at the feasibility of that. But we do at a minimum think that there is demand for a second sheet of ice, but that's a separate project. Greens at Hamilton Run, the pros, the golf course currently operates at an annual loss of more than $200,000 a year. So replacing the golf course with something like this could alleviate a financial burden. In terms of location, it's pretty close to Fairgrounds Park. So again, you have close to East Side hotels, retail restaurants, things like that. The downside is it is an existing use. And you know, there's the potential that there could be a negative reaction from citizens who consider that golf course to be an affordable community asset that they use. So that's worth considering. Downtown Hagerstown, like I said, several people talked about, you know, is that an opportunity for downtown redevelopment? On the con side, you know, we're not, you know, it probably wouldn't be one of our top recommendations to put it in the heart of downtown, simply because, you know, a lot of the downtown parcels that you'd have there, you know, maybe a little bit constrained for what we're talking about in terms of these types of facilities that can require 15, 20 acres and up in order to accommodate the facility and all the parking requirements. It was also raised by a couple of people that, you know, there's a perception that downtown may not be as safe as some other areas, and that should be considered when you're thinking about a youth sports facility. Lastly, municipal stadium. You know, the pros are there's, you know, potential availability of affordable, underutilized land there. But on the con side, you know, we've been told it's a flood-prone area, and a lot of the other uses around it are industrial. Which, you know, those types of uses may not necessarily be compatible uses with youth and amateur sports. It's also not as convenient to some of the nearby tourism amenities. You know, that area doesn't have any hotels or family restaurants or anything along those lines. So ultimately, you know, we would recommend at a minimum taking a look in phase 2 at the Fairgrounds Park site and the Greens at Hamilton Run site. Those would probably be our top 2 optimal recommendations. I believe the proposal that our architectural and engineering partner submitted a couple months ago as part of our initial submittal had up to 3 sites. So, you know, I think it's ultimately, as we talk about next steps, it's up to you all to determine, do we want to narrow down to 1 site for that next phase? Do we want to keep it at 3? You know, what are the sites that we take a closer look at in terms of, you know, does this fit? If so, how? What would it cost? And what would it look like on those sites? So in terms of next steps, you know, if we move forward with phase two and are approved by the city to do so, you know, we would organize another kickoff meeting to bring in our architectural partners who have worked on indoor sports facilities all over the country. They're one of the leading national firms that work on these types of facilities. Have them, you know, gather site information, tour the sites. Ultimately, in phase two, on the Victus side, we would develop, you know, usage estimates, you know, how many people are local, how many people are coming in from out of town, revenue expenses, construction funding options, management options, public-private partnership options, and sports tourism economic impacts, how many hotel nights could be generated, that sort of thing. And then on the architecture side, they would do, you know, more detailed site analysis, site test fits, concept floor plans, and construction cost estimates. Right now, it's for up to 3 sites, but we could potentially change that scope depending on how you wanted to move forward. So, any questions or comments?
The Fairgrounds Park option and the Greens at Hamilton Run option, are those two mutually exclusive areas, or is there a opportunity for synergy between those? In other words, we've got Fairgrounds Park that's already an outdoor soccer, outdoor softball, to avoid having to demo the grandstand and move the police athletic league and that kind of thing. Is there an opportunity to connect the greens to Fairgrounds via an extension of the cultural trail?
I'd have to defer to Rodney on that, but I would think so.
I think you could have a physical link between them.
I was just thinking if you had your indoor facilities where the greens are, and then your outdoor fields at Fairgrounds with a nice method to transverse between those on bikes and foot, and you know, without traffic or having to load back in the minivan and go you know, over to the other side.
We would go through Funkhauser Park. There'd be some places there we'd have to look at it, but they're relatively close together.
Yeah.
They are relatively close together, and just from an economic development standpoint, you know, we work on projects, sports facilities, stadiums, arenas, event centers, things like that, all over the country that are envisioned as economic drivers. And the communities that have the most success in economic development and using catalytic projects to do that are the ones that are able to concentrate those in particular areas. You know, it's not you put one over here, you put one over here, you put one over here. It's how do you define an area that you want to redevelop, and then make sure that the projects you're putting in there are putting feet on the ground every single day. So it's not just, you know, 30 evenings a year or things like that. It's feet on the ground all the time that can support other businesses, other uses around that. And so that's part of the reason we recommend these ideas of you know, how do you think about creating an area that's a sports destination, that's a sports region, that has the hotels that are family friendly, that survive off the business those generate, that have the retail and restaurants that are there to support that. So how do you think about, okay, how can we create a sports destination within the city of Hagerstown?
First, thank you for the hard work. This looks like a lot of stuff. I think that, you know, the two things that I want to, I guess, explain is, or understand is that, you know, when you talk about the Greens at Hamilton Run and the Fairgrounds Park being close to hotels versus municipal stadium, I mean, it's basically dual highway in between. So I'm kind of thinking that both of them have access to the same hotels. So, in my opinion, I don't know if there's other hotels on the east side of Hagerstown that I'm not aware of, but it seems to me like it's somewhat of an equal distance to the amount of, to the hotels. And secondly, I think that we as a body need to decide, like, you know, we heard it at the MML conference, our marketing for our city. Are we marketing ourselves as an arts and entertainment district and an arts and entertainment town, or are we going this route of a sports town? So, you know, I think that that's a very important factor whenever we're talking about, and I'm not in disagreement that an indoor sports center would be fantastic for this area. You know, I had kids in sports and we traveled all over the place. So, but I think that, you know, when we talk about how we're marketing our city, you know, what does that, where are we going with what we're about to do.
And I don't know that those, are we an arts and culture town or are we a sports town, are mutually exclusive necessarily. What we see a lot of times is not necessarily defining yourself that narrowly, but defining yourself by who do we want to attract. And so what we see a lot of times is what is the mix of amenities from arts, culture, entertainment, sports, shopping, all these different things that'll help us attract businesses, attract young families, attract retirees, whatever that community is that you're trying to attract to spur economic development. What is the mix of these different amenities and features that can ultimately appeal to those groups?
I think there's a synergy there between the arts and entertainment and the sports, because as you said, people are looking for destinations where there are things to do.
Yeah.
So during the day, there's a soccer or lacrosse tournament or basketball or volleyball tournament, and then at night, there's the Maryland Symphony performing Disney show tunes, whatever. There's a place to go. It's family-friendly entertainment downtown, and then there's a sports draw during the day. And some people may come to town for the arts and entertainment part. Some people may come to town for the sports part, but they're all in town, and they're all in hotels.
And we work with a lot of communities that already have a facility like this, and now they're looking at how do we take the next step? And, one of the things they always ask is how do we get people, the tournament's Saturday, Sunday, how do we get people to come on Thursday and stay until Monday?
Exactly.
And that's all those other factors. That's the arts, the culture,
Coordination
entertainment,
with
the
the theater
attractions.
events
Exactly.
could draw people.
So I have a couple of comments, and a couple of them reflect Shelley's point about location. Because for me, I think that there's a couple of tenets that I attempt to keep grounded to throughout this process. And one is I think we're a bit premature to pigeonhole ourselves into location. Because while we may sit here and say that, let's just take it, and let me preface it a little bit by saying, I don't think that this body should be looking at locations that we don't own. Because, at least for me, I don't have an interest in this being a public project. I think I've been very clear about that from the get-go, that the impetus for me was to be able to utilize our land to facilitate partners in the private sector to take on a project if it were determined that it will be warranted and marketable. That said, when we take those locations then into account that have this capability of serving that size of a venue, obviously the city only has a few properties in which it owns that could accommodate that. And so I don't think we should take any of those 3 or 4 locations we have off the table, and I don't think we should be getting into architectural design concepts and things like that at this point. I think that, and I hearken back to when the county did the Easton High School study, what the county sat down and did was say, okay, what is this going to serve locationally, and what is it going to cost? Because we may sit here and say, yeah, we'd all like to see it at the greens at Hamilton run because the golf course is losing money, and it makes sense, to substitute one in for the other, but it may cost 3 times as much to develop a site that is, on a slope going down to a floodplain. It's gonna cost us stormwater management, and we have to build, 1,200 space parking lot. So I think those factors have to be taken into account for each of those properties which we own if we're going to take the next step, which is to consider where are these, feasible locations of property we own. And I don't think that you can give a fair assessment of that to any one of these spaces, whether it be the fairgrounds or the stadium or the golf course, or even the one I mentioned over where they're building Southern Boulevard, the old city, the old city farm. I think there's not too many of those that we can't sit down at some high level view and say, okay, what are the accessibility issues? What are the developability issues? What are the locational issues. And, you know,
Site improvement
yeah,
costs, all that kind of stuff.
you mentioned location and what folks want. You know, the Frederick Indoor Sports Complex is tucked back in the back of basically a business park. I mean, it's shut down at 5 o'clock, the entire area, except for that which operates till 2 in the morning, every night of the week. And I use that as an example, and I've been to, you know, any number of facilities over the years, but it still has that accessibility, you know, to those other areas. It's still serving, you know, to meet that demand. And I agree. I don't think that either one of those locations are, you know, whether any one of those three locations are any, you know, further from those amenities. I could sit here and argue that the stadium puts you closer to the mall and the outlets and those areas that are much more accessible to the west side of town, where all your economic, you know, shopping opportunity and retail opportunity is. And I could also argue that it puts you, you know, 3 blocks closer to downtown in that arts and entertainment district if you're trying to get folks to, you know, in the regular course of a day. So I would prefer us to look at the cost analysis of these few locations versus the impetus for that. And then the second side of that, and I think I've said this numerous times, is I think we have to take into account not just what this one item does as it applies to where it's located, but what it could cause to create in the area in which it's located. And, you know, I hear you're citing the stadium property, you know, is in, you know, this sort of industrial area. But let's face it, 80% of the industry of those properties is gone. It basically sits, you know, within an area that 20 years ago was an industrial area, that today is simply an area within the East End that we all know is a bunch of big empty pieces of post-industrial properties, many of which we own. So,
I mean, and my recommendation there would be, you know, the same thing I said still applies, which is, you know, any client that has an area like that they'd like to redevelop, we tell them that you need to do more than just drop the facility down there and then hope the rest gets developed. You need to have a master plan for that area to encourage other development, encourage a hotel to come in, encourage shops to come in. To make sure you have a plan to make, if you do want to redevelop an area essentially from scratch, then you need to make sure you have a plan to change that whole area and to drive economic development in that whole area.
So I think at some stage of the game, we need as a body to figure out what we're doing, all right?
Yes.
What is our objective?
I've been pretty clear on mine.
Well, with that clarity, I would note a couple things. Every single complex other than PG County is owned privately. This I see listed here, either by a nonprofit or by a private organization.
We need to decide.
And I'm assuming that they were started without government spending a lot of money on studies to determine whether they would be a financial success. And when we talk about this being a public-private partnership, I'm interested in when the private comes in. Because we're looking at spending an additional $75,000. Okay, I understood, understand. Because it seems to me now is the time for the private to be coming in. I mean, it seems to me now is the time to be putting out an RFP. Because as I understand the way things work, financially, we're never going to make any money. This isn't going to be something that we make money
On the operation.
on the operations, or on anything, because there'll be taxes. If we're using our own property, you know, it depends what we're going to do. We're going to own the property, therefore is the property not going to generate tax revenue? We're going to own it and lease it, and then so we aren't going to get tax revenue from it. Amusement taxes, we don't get any of that. The hotel taxes, essentially, we don't get any of that, okay? So financially, we're not gonna get anything. Our citizens will get a benefit, But when we're looking at what we're doing, I don't mean to be dumb about it, but why are we limiting it to the city? If we're looking for a private person to come in and run this thing and take it over, and two, I just will say right off the top of the head, there's no sense in even doing a study about the fairground aspect that you're talking about, because we've done a study, so we know what it's gonna cost to take down those grandstands. Forget about moving the stuff. The cost to take down those grandstands is,
Yeah, I'm not interested
what do you
in
think,
that.
Rodney?
At all.
I forget what our last estimates were, but prohibitive is the answer. I'd say it's prohibitive, and the flip side is it's something that'd be nice to be done. So my answer is, unless I'm missing the point, it's time to put out an RFP. We've established that there is a market here, that there is a need here. The question is there a private person out there who thinks they're gonna make money if we don't have to, they don't have to buy the land?
And I agree with that completely, even so far as to say, that's why I have said from the outset, I think that the advantage we offer, and I've said it from the beginning, this is going to happen. Somewhere in this community, that's going to happen, sooner rather than later. There's any number of groups that have tried to tie it, to projects they want to do. So it's clearly, in the eyes of a lot, going to happen. But at the same time, I feel like the advantage we have now is that we have a number of parcels to offer for that prospect of a private entity that would like to do that. And any one of those properties then has, its cost, expense, benefit to them to do so. And that's why I look at this, the report indicates, talks about hard courts and this and that. I don't want to be the purveyor of how that's decided. In other words,
Money in it.
just a week ago, we had the ice folks say, hey, we'd like to do a second sheet of ice and pre-fields up top. And you know what I say? If some private developer in this RFP process comes to me and says, city,
That's great.
you have a piece of land right there, I'd like to put 2 turf fields on the bottom and, 6 volleyball courts on top, and I'm going to do it with your land, I say, great. And I realize that means no second ice sheet for the ice folks, but, it's an idea that's been put out there now, that the land's available, and so no entity should have sort of an edge above another for the availability of access to our land and those properties we offer for that purpose.
Exactly. The flip
to
side,
do that.
the flip side, I would argue, is if the ice rink came to us and said, look at this, we have an engineer who's answered
And
their
they got the
questions,
money?
and we got a financial backer, then I'd say they got both feet in the door real
I have
quick.
no problem with that. As long as they got the money and they're not coming to the city for
Understood.
money, yeah.
And I will say from a public-private partnership side, we work on a lot of projects, both working for the public sector and for private developers, to try to make these facilities happen. More often than not, if you're just looking as a private developer to build a facility, you're either doing that through your own equity, investor money, investors need a return on investment, or you're going out and borrowing the money. If you're building a $15, $20 million facility and you're looking at $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a year in profit, that doesn't pencil out. And so when we work on public-private partnerships, that's kind of the bare minimum for a public-private partnership or something like this, is the city provides the land and makes it pad ready. So that goes back to all the costs you're talking about in terms of making sure that there's access to it, that it's ready to be built on, things like that. That's kind of the bare minimum. And we see them all the way up to the opposite end of the spectrum, still calling it a public-private partnership, but the city owns it, the city builds it, the city issues the bonds to do it, and they go out and find a private operator to operate it off their.
Is that how PG County is operating, do you know, or do they operate their own? Now, that's obviously a major sports complex, has an aquatic center, full track and
That's a
field,
public facility, yeah.
I just gotta-
I don't know
I
of
mean,
any
I-
private facilities in the country at that scale except for Spooky Nook. And Spooky Nook is, it's kind of a community benefit project by a billionaire.
Gotcha.
I find it hard to believe, and I, I could be wrong, I don't know, to what degree, it was reviewed. It's what, 41, 42 schools in Washington County, right? 42 or 43? You know, and I drive by these schools, everyone probably does, you know, any night of the week. And, you know, every one of them has a gym. You know, the one side of 4 Star has been shut down. That used to be a gym, you know, that was used hard court. We talked to the folks at Frederick, you know, that indicated, you know, what they saw, profit loss on their hard court. You got the Arc out there, you know, maybe it's too expensive. Maybe they just don't want anybody else using it.
There's very limited
But that
access.
place sits empty a lot.
It's very
A lot.
limited access. I mean, if you look at the calendar, they
And-
don't even open it up. They open it up to groups for 3 hours, 2 nights a week.
And I just, well, and again, I don't want to
And
get
then
into
the-
picking
the
and
gyms
choosing,
are
but
being used
when more than
and-
50% of your respondents are of one specific sport, and the others fall clearly behind that, and then you realize you've got, you know, dozens of gyms, you know, across this county, dozens. That doesn't even include, you know, the church gyms and the nonprofit gyms like Girls Inc. and Elgin Station and that aren't being used, you know.
But the county doesn't
to
allow,
that
I
degree.
mean,
Yeah.
You can definitely rent that gym space.
the county, public schools do not, you have to have, like, there's a lot of rules in order for the kids to be able to use the county school gyms.
Every
You
place
can't-
has rules.
No, I understand that, but they're very, very, very limited, and a lot of times they don't even open them during the summer.
When they set up the athletics out at the Morgansville, whichever one, 3 of the schools have some POS money kicked in to make them accessible. I mean,
We heard over and over again
It's
from basketball,
difficult.
volleyball, that unless
It's
you have a
very difficult.
connection at a particular school,
Can't get in.
you can't get in.
That's my understanding.
No,
And even if you do have a
can't.
connection,
Expensive.
you have to pay
A lot of money.
significantly over what's a typical rate for gym access.
Yeah.
You know, several $100s an hour instead of $50 an hour. And again, it's, you know, you get it on Tuesday and Thursday from 9 to 10 PM, you know, things like that.
And I go back to the fact that in the summertime, I don't think that it's even available at all until summer gym starts. So, I mean, and there's kids out there that would love to have gym time, but again, you know, it's very, very restricted.
Can I just give my
I know, it
impression
is hard to
of
believe.
everything that I've heard, and of course, I've read the entire study, so. And I know what Kristen has envisioned, okay? I don't oppose that at all. I believe that if we are to do an RFP, we do an RFP on one site, and that is a site that we own that currently could be used for something else, but it is being used for something else at this point in time. And I believe that RFP comes back, when we put that RFP out, we put it out as Kristen envisions, which is, you know, we give you the land, and it becomes a tax-paying entity because we're not gonna own it. We shouldn't own the land at that point in time. We will get A&A tax, because we get A&A tax right now from the Hagerstown Suns, which is in our facility. So we will recover money that way, even though we basically lose an asset that's worth 1.3 million as far as the assessable base goes, on the tax records anyway at this point in time. That's what municipal stadium is assessed at, what that property is. So I believe that if we do an RFP, we do an RFP for that site, and we find a private investor who says, okay, you're giving me the land, you're giving it to me plot ready, and this is what I can do, and this is my proposal. And then we figure out if it's worth it.
And from our experience, if you're mandating that they take ownership of the land, thus it goes on the property tax rolls, it's very rare that an indoor sports facility on its own operations can cover, it would lose money every year after taxes. And so what we
There's always
find,
tax increment, there's
So what we
always a
find, though, is
possibility to do tax
the
incentives.
best
when it comes
practices
to
is
that.
to get a developer to come in and say, okay, you need 15 acres, 20 acres, whatever it is for the indoor sports facility. We've got a 40-acre site. We've got a 60-acre site. And we want proposals that allow you that ancillary development as well, which is actually in your benefit, because then you also get the hotel, you also get the.
we don't have that acreage.
So,
I mean,
the golf course does.
Let me express another concern.
if it's a floodplain.
I mean, I need to be careful in how I word this, but we need to be concerned about the, talk about hotel and motels in the immediate vicinity. And I'm just thinking about the hotels and motels in the immediate vicinity.
Yeah,
I've been thinking that this whole
they will be
time.
converted back into marketable hotels.
Well,
That
that-
turnover
that-
happens fast.
That
We've seen
would
it.
have to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that, because otherwise we're gonna have the exact opposite result. We're gonna invite people here to Hagerstown and never wanna come back.
I think that you're absolutely right.
I think by process of attrition, this would have that effect.
I think we would have to do some significant work with those people before we did this whole
Or
project.
other people.
Yeah, I mean, and my concern with what you're saying, Mayor, I hear you talking about the municipal stadium site. I mean, I don't know how you do that as long as we have a professional baseball team who wants to.
Yeah, where are they gonna
I'm,
go?
I'm not limited to one site, like I said.
No, I
think
understand,
these
but
are
the mayor
our-
was wanting to limit it to one site.
Yeah, I hear that.
I'm, for one, this is just me speaking, I've never, ever considered telling the Suns that we're not gonna renew their lease as long as they wanna stay, which would put us in a difficult, basically telling the Suns they're out of here as soon as we put an RFP out saying that that's the only site that we want them to look at.
I don't think we should limit it to one site,
I
but I
don't think
think
we
we
should either.
definitely need to figure out if there's people that are willing to invest, because we keep hearing that there are, but yet no one's come
And I
forward.
don't, I mean, we're not offering anything.
In addition to the site selection, I'm a little bit torn about whether we want this to be a city-run facility or a nonprofit-run facility or give it to a private operator. And my first thought in looking at all this was, as the mayor said, let's give it to a private operator. Basically, we've got a nice marketing study here. It kind of shows the demand. Maybe the first step of phase 2 goes a little bit further into that and basically gives a whole lot of information to a private developer to say, do you want to do you want to give us a proposal to take this over and run it as a private entity? And can you make a profit at it? That's one way to go. But then, and correct me if I'm wrong, one of the takeaways I had from our prior talk was when you have a private operator of a facility like this, they shy away from major tournaments because they're looking at selling their own program. So if we want this as a facility that's going to bring tournament play into the area, bring all these outside folks in, we're gonna be at odds with that private operator, similar to the way we're at odds right now on the soccer fields. You know, if you and I want to put a soccer team together and we want to go practice at fairgrounds, we're going to have a hard time getting permission to do that because those are pretty well controlled by an organization. So by having this go to a private operator, we could be kind of negating our benefit of a massive tournament play type of
And are we
facility.
willing to even talk about the potential to have any portions of, say, Fairgrounds Park deeded to a private owner? As Christian
Yeah, I
just
don't
told us
think
not
that's a
long ago,
requisite
that
thing to do.
they're selling their place now in Frederick. It's
Transferring operations to a
yeah,
private.
so I mean, you know, there are certain pieces of property that I could see doing an actual land transfer, but I sure couldn't see on the properties we're talking about, especially Fairgrounds Park.
Yeah, I don't know why we limit ourselves to that particular.
I don't think we should. I think
don't.
we should put out an
Location.
RFP for anybody who's interested in discussing with the city, coming in with us as a partner with city-owned property for free, and find out.
And, you know, and speaking to the tournament versus play, I mean, Westminster has operated successfully for years, being able to balance or find a balance for both. I mean, they have tournament activity and they have, you know, a local activity. And they have three
I'm sure
fields and
it
they've
can
been
be
able
done.
to work.
Yeah,
That
we
was
just
pointed
have
out.
some clients where we've actually been hired to help them figure out how to fix that situation where they've they've basically built a facility for an operator or gave them the land tax-free, that sort of thing. And then
Virginia
after they
Beach is
hit
looking at
Virginia
building a
Beach,
new
yeah,
facility.
after they hit about 3 to 4 years into operating the facility, most of them figure out that their highest profit margins will be off developing their own activity.
And of course, while I may have gotten some immediate negative feedback from the timing, I would note we have a pretty good example of how things can work. And we're sitting here looking at it with the ice rink that is a private-public partnership that is being run now with minimal expenses to the city. So, you know, there are ways to do it, but there's got to be somebody who's willing to step forward and with the money. That's the whole issue. Same issue as minor league baseball. Somebody comes forth with the money and says they want to invest. We're here to be, we're here to
We'll
be
listen.
partners with them.
Yep. But because of that now, the public has already made up their mind that this is happening, at the ice rink is doing it. You know, this has been the emails I've been getting all week, but you just said, in your experience with this, that that's not even having an ice on one level and,
I said I just haven't seen it.
yeah.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's not possible, but I'm not an engineer and I haven't seen it before. So I would just want to see, I would want to see a qualified architect and engineering firm kind of vet that model and the functionality of it.
Yeah.
I have seen other things like ice shared with swimming pool, and they're supposed to have these systems that reuse the warm air and cycle it through. And I know of a number of those that were built 10 years ago, kind of a wave of those. Every single one has shut it off and separated them because you end up with sort of the warm areas are too cold, the cold areas are too warm. Issues with condensation, things like that that come into play. So I would just want to know
Right.
that it is operationally viable. Because I haven't seen a model like that attempted, to be honest, so.
Well, I think it's important to note, and like I said, I'm not opposed to the ice rink folks' idea at all, any more than any other idea, except for the greens at Hamilton Run. I am 100% opposed to that location, just throwing that out there. I think it is environmentally disastrous to build a facility of this magnitude and create that level of impervious area in that sort of vestige of green space in an otherwise, overly urban area when you have other locations that are better suited and readily available that we own in the immediate vicinity. It just makes no sense to me to do that for that particular piece of property, knowing that. Cost aside, because let's be honest, we have a public-private partnership with the ice rink now because we spent $10.4 million of the public's money building it. We still cover a significant
$130,000.
amount
Cover the
of annual
utilities.
operating costs. So that, I'm not interested in doubling that. I'm not interested in taking on another one of those, $10 or $12 million cost projects. And I don't have any understanding at this point that that entity, any more than any other entity, has money raised to do this. So I think the thing that folks out there need to understand that the reaction is twofold. One is that was a recently developed idea, and exactly that. That isn't something that the ice rink folks were ready to break ground with $12 million of their own money, tomorrow on, but rather the opposite. And I get it. They wanted to make sure that they weren't sort of left out. That their idea wasn't left out. And what I'm saying is I'm not interested in leaving any of those ideas out, except for the golf course, and pigeonholing us in any of those parameters of own or lease or, But I think it does cause concern, though, if you're going to say, and I don't know how long you say that, and let's be honest, when the stadium didn't happen downtown, everybody out there said, okay, well, you're just going to bury your head in the sand and you're never going to come up with anything else, and the sky's going to fall and the city's going to, burn into a black hole in the earth. It didn't happen. And I said, well, okay, well, here's a viable alternative use. You know, Bruce Quinn wants to take the team and leave town, and he's courting himself to 3 other communities. Let's turn that place into an indoor turf facility. That's how it came out. And so all I'm saying is, I think you also gotta ask yourself, if there's a private developer that does come forward and does have that serious interest, then I think you do have to make that decision at some point, is how long do you hang on to one venue user and forego an actual $12 or $15 million interested investment by another private entity that says, hey, I want to take this place and turn it into this.
And I don't
Someone
have a
comes
problem
forward
with that,
with $12
Christian.
million,
My,
they can have
my problem is putting out an RFP that says the only site available is the municipal
Okay,
stadium.
okay.
I mean, that's just a message to the Suns that we're not
Right.
interested in even talking to them.
Understand that.
That's my concern. And, you know, and then you jump ahead, getting ahead of ourselves. You know, somebody's got to tell me how much it's going to cost to take down the municipal stadium and all the.
So many things.
You could also
Yeah.
pick 3 sites in an RFP and ask them to say.
But
which
we
they
only have
prefer.
so many sites available that we own that would be.
And I think
yeah.
downtown's out, in my mind, you
Well,
can't
you
pass
can't put a sports
downtown.
complex
So
downtown.
that leaves 3 locations, I think we put in an RFP.
The fairgrounds, the golf course, and the stadium.
I mean, I'm kind of with Kristen on the golf course part.
Well, I thought it was Fairgrounds Park, the stadium, and the old city farm. But I didn't think we were talking about the golf course anymore.
Yeah. I didn't even ask Brian to look at that site. It's pretty tough terrain-wise.
Pretty hilly, yeah.
Pretty hilly. It's being used by our operations right now. I mean, we can include that, but I'm not sure it's gonna work out.
You know, then I think of it.
Well, that's out.
I think-
They don't even know where it's at, so that's out.
What do we grow there?
I think a review and Herald.
We grow nothing.
I think a review and Herald, and it's, you know, and that's why I sometimes wonder.
That's not it.
Oh,
That was just an.
No,
No, what Kristen's talking
Where is
about
it?
is out by,
Over near,
between Frederick Street and Edgewood Drive,
over near the Harrison tract.
right.
and behind, basically, what's it called, it used to be the yogurt place, I'm sorry.
give me a landmark.
Good humor.
Yeah, behind what used to be Good Humor, in that area.
Near the Harrison tract.
Very, very hilly, very,
But let me
but
just ask you, if I were an investor, I don't know, I guess maybe
would
the
you
cost of the
you got a
land.
road going right through there,
Southern Boulevard's getting
coming
built.
soon, yeah.
They're
That's
gonna ask you
why-
to flatten it. It's the first thing they're gonna ask.
Right, and that's why, you know, I think a place like Review and Herald, which is right off the interstate.
Which is
flat
outside the
land.
city of Edgewood.
No, I understand that, and that's why I say, what are we?
But are we gonna get any tax
What-
revenue out of it?
What's our
anyway?
thought process? What are we doing this for? Are we doing it to supply a place for our community and to bring in tourism?
There,
Or are we doing it to try to make
Make
money?
money.
And if we're not trying to do it to make money, and especially when I think of all the potential sites and the topographies, and I'm not saying Review and Herald is available, and I'm not saying that what, if it were what they would charge, I'm just saying, when I think about, if I'm a private investor and I think of all the locations, I don't know if you know where I'm talking about, but it's right off Interstate 70. And right now,
And the outlets.
you could put probably what, how many soccer fields could you put on that?
Highway access and outlet malls.
It's a
Highway
perfect
access,
location.
right there, it's right next to the outlets, the premium outlets. It's right next to premium outlets, right off the interstate, and flat as a pancake.
I mean, that's where
I-
I'm,
I-
that's where I think anyway, so, I don't know.
I mean, I think
The only-
it should be in the city.
yeah, I mean, the only private place you get
We're
me
the ones
interested in
paying
is the Green Monster.
For God's sake.
And that's just because of its proximity, to the other locations in downtown. The old paper plant that
Oh,
shut
okay,
down.
yeah, but again, you have the same problem.
That's why I said our properties, I think, are what have the advantage.
Yeah,
So I go back to the expert here, who we just paid a significant amount of money, who outlined 4 areas, one of which we're saying is not possible, so why don't we stick to the other 3? I mean, if we're gonna put out an RFP, and that was his job to identify them, and he did, so shouldn't we go with what he thinks?
Oh, sure,
Well, I
as
also-
long as it's our goal.
I think that you have to decide whether or not you're going to tell staff, go straight to this RFP, or whether you want to go into phase 2 work. That's what, we need to know that.
I don't think we should spend another
For me,
$80,000 if there's no
No.
one coming forward with money.
Okay,
For-
that's,
for
I mean,
me,
I'm just
phase-
saying, that's what
Yeah,
staff
but
has to
for me,
know.
phase two would be saying, okay, you know what, we've decided on these couple of locations. Now please give us a high, I don't know, a high view of conceptual cost.
So
development.
That's what that would do.
50,000 of that proposal
That's
is
what
the
that would do,
architecture and engineering
phase two.
partner. So our next phase would be, this is what any private partner would want to see, the usage estimates, the revenue, the profit opportunity. Typically, our clients also want us to do the economic impact analysis, so
Yeah.
they know what the benefit in taxes will be, and visitation will be. So, I mean, that could be, a scaled down phase two that has those key things from us, and then, having an architecture engineer partner basically do a site matrix that says, here's how this works in terms of access, here's what it might cost to get it site ready, some of those things. Sounds like that's sort of what Kristen's asking for. Because that would all be useful stuff to include in an RFP. And we've helped clients put together RFPs like that before, so.
I don't know how much of that I'd want to see the city pay for. It's like.
That
Or draw up.
Or draw up.
That
If-
becomes the whole issue, is that the more I hear, the more it sounds like it is, in reality, not an economically feasible thing for a private business to do on its own.
Right.
Rarely.
Yeah, which is, I candidly think that the results of the study are telling us that what we envisioned isn't gonna happen.
Unless you give them ancillary development rights to do a hotel and to do, that kind of stuff. And then it pencils out.
Well, and we could do that if we had a big enough tract
Big
of
enough
land.
land.
But the
Exactly.
only tract of land that I can think you could do that on is fairgrounds.
And golf course.
Yeah, I mean, the golf course, excuse me, that's what I meant, the golf course. And Kristen has a point, I don't know what it would cost us in terms of, stormwater management, just to take the amount of impervious, the amount of green space and make it impervious, what that would cost the city, I don't know. But it really is beginning to sound like it is not something that is economically feasible for private business to run without financial support.
But the East End area offers that conglomeration of properties, again, of larger tracts that have that development potential that could accommodate things like TIFs to make it economically attractive.
But the only property we control is the stadium.
I hear that, but when we did the Plan B of the second stadium analysis, it identified in that study 12 and a half acres. It was the one area within the entire study of that process that identified twice the land of any other location, whether it be Hospital Hill, downtown, the existing stadium site. Plan B indicated twice the acreage, 12 and a half acres, not even including the recycling plant or Melp or any of those other areas, or the area out Eastern Boulevard. All I'm saying is that area in its totality, in my opinion, is that area that has that greatest economic opportunity through incentives for redevelopment to occur.
I would suggest, Mayor, that we put out, I don't know what you want to call it, I'll just use the word RFP, okay? Because it's really not an RFP, because that's a request for proposals. I would like to put out a request for partners. Who is interested at this time in partnering with the city of Hagerstown and building an indoor sports complex? Period. Right now, we're not looking for any money up front at all, not a penny. We're looking for interest,
I could
okay?
give you 5 companies right now.
That would be
would say
great.
yes with no strings attached.
I would love them to come in
The
and talk
problem
to us.
is, once you start trying to attach strings.
Well, that's what,
Yeah.
but,
I mean, that's what we're here for, is to figure out what those strings are. and
that's
see if
right.
they're feasible.
So if we
How
can
we can attach
identify potential partners, then I would like them to come in and talk to
I
us.
mean, we did that with Soros and any
then-
other number of
And then we
groups.
can find out.
And we're doing that right now with the UIP. There's some from us, there's a bunch from them, there's some from the state. I mean, so I don't think that's,
That's what I'd like to do, not a request for proposals, a request for potential interest.
we didn't draw up the UIP in a single fashion, in a
No, and
single
then we
day
can
and
have
say
folks
this is what
come in
it's
and
going
talk
to
to
be.
us, and we can find out what it is that we could all do. Together, to sit down right from the get-go, to see if there truly is an interest in doing this and what we would need to be doing it.
Yeah, I'm good with that,
This is
and then we don't do a phase two at this point in time until
Not
we get
until
that
we talk to
information
those
back.
folks and
Right.
make sure we
Okay.
have an interest.
Rodney, you understand? No.
Does that make sense to you?
I
And
can
then-
tell you what they'll say, and I can tell you what they'll ask for, and I can tell you who the 5 or 6 companies, if that, in the country that are capable of doing that are, that have the experience doing it. It'd be easy enough. I mean, I would prefer to help you all through that process rather than just sort of walk away at this point.
We're not asking you to walk away.
Oh, no,
walk
no.
away. We're
Yeah,
asking
if they
you to
come back
sit on
and
the
say, we need to
sideline
see this,
for a couple
then we have to
minutes.
decide whether or not we're ready to provide what they're asking.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, the more you can define, the better. And the more you can say, look, this is 1 or 2 or 3 things that we want as part of this, and this is what we're willing to give you. If you just leave it completely open, they'll come in and ask for the work. And I know what they'll ask for. They won't want to pay property taxes on it. They'll want you to build the whole thing and just give it to them to operate. They'll want ancillary development rights. They'll want, they'll ask for everything. And the reason they ask for it is because there's cities and counties out there that give that to them. And so you need to establish some boundaries at the beginning that you're comfortable with and say, this is what would take for us to move forward. Put that in the RFQ. And if you only get 2 responses, or you don't get any, or maybe you get 3 or 4, but most of them say, okay, we understand what you're asking for, but for this to work for us, we'd also need this included. That's probably the best way to go. I think if you just leave it totally wide open, you'll get all these in, they'll be all over the place, and you won't even know where to go from there. Does that make sense? I think you need to have some sort of boundaries in there that say, okay, here's 3 potential sites we're going to talk about. Here's our vision for how this would work, which is, you take ownership at some discounted price, so it's on the property tax rolls, whatever.
Yeah, and
whatever
I
it is.
think you've
We'll get
already-
it pad ready.
I think you've already answered the questions. I truly do. I think you've already answered the questions for us, and that is that the city, in order to have this happen, is going to have to put in a large amount of skin in the game as far as cash.
Yes.
And that's the decision we gotta make.
Unless you have we call it the white knight scenario. Unless somebody shows
Right,
up and just
Cal
says, hey,
Ripken,
I want to
yeah.
do this.
Right,
And
right.
does it with or without your help.
And it
That's
probably,
so
and
rare.
it
Hearing is
probably
out
would be
there, so-
7 figures.
Yeah.
I feel like
They
they're
stepped
there. We just haven't found
They
them.
haven't offered the property.
They do happen. I can literally name them.
I feel like that
Spooky
billionaire has a
note.
lot of
Yeah.
money. He probably wants to come here. The $75,000 that the second phase would cost, is that in our budget? Did we budget for that?
No, it would have to come out of contingency.
Ugh, okay.
Yeah. And I think the modified proposal that we've talked about would be less than that.
Yeah, that's concepts and site layouts and floor plans for up to 3 different sites.
Right, and
And construction cost estimates and all that. yeah.
so my point is are we willing to pony up 7 figures for this project? Because if we're not going to have a project. That's what I'm hearing.
Does that
I
count
mean, I
in the
think we
value
make-
of land and?
Yeah, I think
No.
we're making a lot of
No.
assumptions right now. I think we need to get back to your idea of,
Just seeking
we
out
have these
partners.
properties. Yeah, this is our interest. I mean, like I said, I can name 3 or 4 projects just recently that
Well, we have nothing to
UIP
lose.
wasn't
We have
defined
nothing, listen,
in a
we have
single
nothing to
motion.
lose by doing it, because I can tell you right now, what I'm hearing from what you're saying is we probably aren't gonna be able to do it. I mean, unless we're willing to expend a fair amount of money on this project. That's all.
It's like, the more you can sweeten the pot for a potential
Right.
partner, the more likely it is to happen.
Right.
So you just have to figure out where your limit is.
Mm-hmm.
And try to define that as much as you can without scaring people away. If you do,
Right, and
if you do
then-
an RFQ.
And for us, it's known as priorities. We have so much money in our budget, and when we start looking at where we wanna spend our money, is this gonna be where it is?
Speaking only for myself, if we're talking about 7 figures, I think our kids desperately need something to do. We hear that all the time, and if there is a need in our community, if I'm gonna spend a whole bunch of money on something and there is a way to make this work with a private partner, I would be willing to spend money on something like this. But we need to get to that point first. So I'm not like, no way, the city's not putting any money, me personally. I think this is exactly the type of thing we should be putting money in, because it provides tourism and all these things that we just talked about. Isn't this what we want? I mean, this provides an outlet for our kids, an outlet for our parents, a reason for people to come to Hagerstown. Like, this solves a lot of the problems that we are having. But you're right, we don't have 15 million to put into it. But if we're talking a substantial amount of money, in my opinion, this is a worthwhile thing to explore. But we need to have partners that are willing to put up money. And we keep hearing that they're out there. And I know you guys get the same type of emails I do, but where are they? Come forward now, please.
I'd be curious to know, if you have a
Yeah.
list, I'd be curious to know.
Yeah, we'd like to see them too.
There's a lot of groups out there that want to be your public-private partner, but in the
But don't wanna
sports
put up money.
world, there's so many cities, counties, convention and visitor bureaus, sports commissions competing for sports tourism impacts, that most of those groups that I know and work with and deal with all the time that are proven sports facility developers and operators, they're not putting a whole lot of skin into them, because they can pit all these different cities and counties against each other and says, who wants 50,000 hotel nights?
And the other
Who wants
thing is,
100,000
Emily,
hotel nights?
the other thing I gotta tell you is what you're saying about giving our kids something to do. Unless I am wrong, this project, if completed, will be similar to playing softball or soccer at the fairgrounds.
Exactly.
If you're in a league, you'll have something to do, but if you're not in a league,
gonna say exact
you're
same
not,
thing.
you're not going out there. You gotta be in a league, and then there's also,
Yeah, it's not a fitness center. where you
it's
buy
not a
membership.
fitness center, and then I will tell you, when you start talking
Leagues,
about the
camps,
traveling
clinics,
leagues, you're
things like that.
talking about the exact opposite people. You're talking about people with money. There is not a lot of kids that I know of that play in these traveling teams that fit into the,
Unless you have community nonprofits or programs that subsidize the cost of competing.
exactly.
Now, the,
Even that, a lot of them-
Versus,
childhood going to
versus
ice
I
rinks that
have
had
to
doors,
say,
so.
you know, I've always and still continue to be a fan of the ice rink.
Yeah,
Which-
I traveled all over the country ice skating,
Which
but at
we're
rinks that
hearing
had
is
two ice
what a
rinks.
second sheet of
You
ice
can't even
would
bid if you
do.
don't have two sheets.
You
Yeah.
know, a second sheet of ice would be, so, you know, I still believe that there's a lot to be said for looking at what we already have.
Oh, there absolutely needs to be a second sheet
And
of
from
ice. I
that,
mean,
from
I
that
don't think you
standpoint,
can
the
take that
Maryland
off the
Sports
table.
Commission said, just looking at what's there now, add another softball field, so we have a fourplex, we can market that to tournaments. Add a second sheet of ice, we could market that for hockey and figure skating. And then if you're going to build a new facility, make sure it's an indoor court facility.
So-
Those are the assets we could market for sports tourism.
we're talking about this public-private partnership, and we've already said the city's not gonna gain anything in the way of tax revenue from this. It's the people that are standing to benefit the most are the hotels. So maybe the private partnership we should be looking at are the hotel builders and the hotel owners in town, because they're the ones that are gonna benefit from this.
Paging
And
Mr.
maybe
Bowman.
they're the ones that should make an investment in this.
We get some of that funding now.
Very little.
Very little.
$180,000 a year.
That, from our experience, that's the most attractive public-private partnership opportunity
Seems
you can
like
put
a
out
lot.
there is, like I said before, here's 40 acres,
spend about
20 is for
75%
the
of it
sports
on
facility, here's what we'd like to see loot generally. You also get this 20 that needs to be developed with, you tell us, mixed
So right
use.
now, all the new hotels are going on Railroad Lane, maybe they need to be
And
going
you'll
next
get
to the.
bid, what'll happen is you'll get bid from developers that will partner with a sports facility operator.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was you, that's the type of bid I'd want, because I know if it's just the sports facility
Yeah,
operator bidding,
you're giving us the answer. I
they're
mean,
gonna
you really
want,
are. You
they're gonna
told
want
us.
everything, they're not gonna pay for anything.
Yeah,
They're gonna say,
you-
look at
you-
what we'll generate for you if you let us operate it.
Yeah, you've
You
given
want
us the
developer
answer.
proposals that are partnering with, and I can name the firms they'll partner with that are sports facility operators. And each one will have a different one as their partner on the bid.
So should we use you to like have a phase 1A in order to help us with this, you know, that isn't $75,000? In order to help us get to this next stage, because it seems like you have a
Yeah, we've
You could
helped
be very
clients with
helpful.
RFPs and all that. I mean, we could certainly help you with putting it together, with, you know, evaluating the proposals,
Well, and
conducting
look at what our
interviews, all that.
parameters are and what our boundaries are, because, you know, like you said, if we don't have any, then we're gonna get all kinds of,
So that would be an option. another
For like
option would be doing a
$1,000.
scaled down phase two where we do some of, because they're usually gonna wanna see, again, the usage
Yeah.
and the revenue, and
I recall.
the profit opportunity from the facility, that sort of thing.
And I don't think we should spend money we don't have. I think the use of reserve funds should be for emergencies, and this is far from an emergency. And if we're going to do further studies, I think we need to do it as part of our budget. And I know that puts this thing off substantially longer, but if what we're gonna do is talk about spending money for anything, and again, Austin, you said it so well when you said, we need to start talking about the budget a lot earlier. And my point again is, yeah, we talk about it all year, but we just act like we don't. We just say, okay, we'll spend this, we'll spend that, we'll spend this, and then we get to May and go, we needed to talk about this stuff before we got here. I don't, in my entire time on this council, I've never heard of reserve funds being expended for something like this. It's gotta be, you just don't go into your
I agree with you 100%. I'm not in favor of that at all. The only way I could see us doing it in fiscal 19 is, as I was told many, many, many times, the budget, there's still room to manipulate the budget, and if we need this much money, we
Right.
can take it from
Right, and so that's the
something
good
else.
thing of saying, do you find we're spending this kind of money on something that is not as beneficial as doing this study? And my suspicion is right now, I would put the study off.
unless we can find something.
Mm-hmm.
But I agree. It either gets pushed to fiscal 20 or we find something to.
But I don't think we're doing the whole phase two. I think that that's part of it.
Oh,
We're
any of
trying
it.
to,
Well,
not
you
even
gotta find
doing the
money for any
private.
of
Are
it.
you saying scrap phase two and proceed with RFQ instead and have us
Oh,
assist
I don't
with that?
care
'Cause
how
that
we
would be
do it.
significantly cheaper.
Oh, yeah, all I'm saying is we can't do phase two now unless we're gonna expend money that we don't have, unless we find, to take it out of somebody
Take
else's
it out of
budget.
something else in the budget.
If you want to just do an RFP or an RFQ, I could work with Brian out of my operating budget to fund that. I mean, but there's money in my operating budget to fund the amount of money you're talking about
Typically,
there.
we just set that up as an hourly, depending on how much assistance we provide.
And the only thing I would say about that, and I leave it up to everybody else, but I think you've done a superb job, and I think you've given us the answer. And the answer is, this is not going to be done by a private corporation. We're either gonna, and if we wanna go forward, then we need to discuss budgetarily what we're willing to put into this. As the Urban Improvement Project says, we want this money, and the Maryland Theater says, we want this money, and, Pangborn Park says, we need this money for this reason, we need to get our priorities where they are at, and that fits in with, Emily.
Our
who's been-
goal setting.
Right, you got
Yes.
it, and I would
Yes.
say until we do that, we have nowhere to go, until we have the goal-setting meeting, determine where we're looking to go.
So we're not gonna offer up anything?
I don't care if we put an RFQ out for
Okay.
partners, but it seems pretty clear what the answer is. It seems that we've got to decide how much money we're willing to put in the game, because
I mean-
clearly, we paid a consultant to tell us there is no way we're just giving somebody raw property and they're gonna come in and do this without us putting money into this.
And I think that we have to have a goal setting or some kind of something, this body, retreat, I don't care what it is, before we even go on, to decide what we're doing as a whole. And not just this, with everything that we've been talking about. Austin and I have been, put into the, your term, as an appointment, and I just feel like we're missing something, and in order to go on to the RFQ, I think that we have to decide together our goals. So, and then move on to the RFQ, and then move on to the next part.
Well, I'm all for goal setting, because I think we also need a retreat. I've been saying that over and
That's
over,
right.
but I don't think we should just stop this either, because there are
No.
already other entities that are planning things, and we're gonna fall behind. And the county has already talked about it, they budgeted money. I mean, if
When you say fall behind, if the objective is to get a multi-indoor sports complex here, is there a reason we care whether it's in the county or in the city? I mean, that's one thing I haven't
For
been.
me, there is.
What's the reason?
Yeah, what do we gain?
What do we gain by being in the city versus?
I think we
in the county?
definitely gain those tourism-related dollars.
Yeah,
There's direct
absolutely.
impact to restaurants. I mean, if nothing else, when we heard from, I forget his name now.
Yeah,
with the Aberdeen
tourism-related
facility.
dollars are great for the hotels and they're
And our
great
small
for the
businesses.
restaurants.
I'd love
that
to
we
see our
need.
hotels on the dual highway reused,
You have
and
a
the
lot
restaurants,
more-
you
you
know,
have a lot more
reoccupied. I
confidence
mean,
than I.
oh, you're right, maybe I do. Maybe I do, but I
Wait a
just,
minute, wait a minute, trying to say he's off the place, stop.
I just think it's, I don't see any reason to not, I guess, put this out there in some fashion.
I don't
I
care if we
agree.
do or we don't. I'm fine with doing it.
We did talk to the county as well. They said they had somewhere in the range of 7 to 9 million earmarked for this project, and that they were highly interested in partnering with the city to try to make it happen.
Well, maybe that's our first
Well,
place to go. There's our money, people.
That took a long
Okay,
time
so
for you
why,
to say
why
that.
why don't we start having staff talk to the county, and why don't we start working?
They want to
conjunction
operate
with-
it, though.
Well, that's fine with me.
Well, we want to give them the land to do so.
Yeah, I mean, that makes all the sense in the
Yeah.
world. So,
Did you
how
know?
about, before we put out an RFQ, how about? if
Well,
we
I've
have
known
our
for years
staff
that they
talk
want
to
this
the
type
county?
of facility.
Right,
That was a staff person.
and you keep
It
saying
was a staff,
someone's
it was a
gonna
staff
do it.
person, and they said that they had made some, initial plans, and then they put it off until after
They've-
new commissioners
They've
came in,
wanted that for years.
so.
But-
Let's
Well,
have
we got
staff talk
land
to
we can
staff
give them.
and see what we can get
and-
accomplished.
That sounds like the next step in the
Yeah.
process, is
They
have
want it of
staff
a
talk
nature
to
that's
staff, and then
much
we'll come
larger
back
than
and
our
revisit
land.
it, okay?
Well, and they said too that they felt like partnering with the city can enable it to be bigger and be something that would drive.
I don't think they want to do anything in a distant calendar year.
That's okay.
I'm okay with
I don't
that.
think we are either.
This calendar year is coming to a close faster than we think, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Oh, no.
staff's gonna talk to staff about,
After the end of the year?
well, I mean, you can start a conversation now and figure out where their plans are, what their budget is, all that kind of good stuff, we can go from there.
No, wait, whoa. Because they had no interest in having this conversation until after the election.
Because they don't want it in these places. They want it of a size and venue that's being described in this report, which is going to require it to go somewhere else.
Why?
You know that for a fact?
I know the other venues that have been considered in the past being in that prior position. Yeah. And they were not locations of this size and scope.
They're bigger.
Well, I think that's a different conversation, because now we're still talking about putting it off till next year, so we're just not doing anything. I'm just confused as to how, I don't think that's a very good next step.
And then all these people
Well,
will
have
go
the
to
staff
that
talk to
place,
staff?
In January,
which would be somewhere way out of town.
after the election, I just don't think that that's a great next step either. I mean, if they're willing to put up $7 to $9 million, or whatever it is, obviously, there needs to be some sort of partnership, but I don't think we should just be like, all right, well, we'll wait 6 more months.
Well, why
So,
would-
yeah, I mean,
why
if you wanna
would-
wait and talk
why
to
would
the county, you know,
staff
then-
say they were interested in talking to the city if there wasn't some kind
Well,
of?
because you got staff that are interested, but you got people.
They
running
didn't
for
say they were
office.
interested in talking to the city, they
A
simply
place
said
like Review and Herald.
that,
It's a good size.
they view a partnership with the city as a plus, because they mentioned the theater project as an example of them working together, and just said that, potentially having more resources to go into the project would enable it to be bigger, to provide more local access and drive more economic impact. So,
Okay, we have to make a decision for staff on what their next step is, if any. If you want them to go out and get an or put out an RFQ just for some groups who might be interested, and whatever they bring in, whatever they send in, and we look at.
I think we have to do that anyway. I mean, I think we have to, we're gonna have to
Let's
do
go
that
ahead and do
anyway.
it.
I'm completely interested in doing that for those two locations,
Okay, let's do it.
Okay.
Which two? Just so I'm clear.
Fairgrounds and Stadium.
Okay, there you go.
I'm fine with the golf course,
I'm gonna
too.
work with Brian on that. I'll take care of that
You got
contractually.
one for the golf course.
I got two.
Through
for the
through your
golf course.
budget.
I want to hear the golf course.
Yeah, I think
I
we
do.
should include all
Golf
3
course.
places.
Include all three places.
Right. The golf course is the most attractive.
Yeah, I would think it
I
is.
want to hear,
We're
yeah.
losing $270 a year there right now.
Yeah, that's.
And it's going
golf
up
course
every
is
year.
attractive to me.
I'm in.
According to the pro forma.
That's three locations.
for an RFQ.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
City Administrator, any comments?
No, sir.
Shelley, any comments?
No, sir.
Lou?
By grace.
Oh, yes.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday?
Yes, sir. Sunday in downtown.
Sunday in downtown. Yep,
I will be volunteering and I will have a whistle, so that is exciting.
yes.
That's scary.
And
Yes.
Wind Down,
I would
Wind
say
Down
so.
Friday.
Wind Down Friday.
University
Wind
Plaza.
down Friday, right, University Plaza. Austin?
I just wanted to say, last Saturday, I was honored to attend the Korean War commemorative ceremony, and it was an honor to shake the hands of a dwindling number of vets. They showed up there with their canes, walkers, helping hands, leading them in, and I'm sure a lot of aches and pains, but they were there as they were during the war to support us. I also found out while I was there, the Vietnam Memorial has made really good progress on their donations. They are still short. They still need help. So if anybody can, any businesses can lend a helping hand, that would be much appreciated. That's another group that was, in my lifetime and Lou's lifetime, we saw people who didn't want to go to war told, your number came up in the lottery, you're going to war. And then when they came back, we gave them a much less than honorable welcome coming home. And thank God those times have changed, and I think this memorial is a good way to say something about that.
Here, here.
They have a Facebook page, like their Facebook page, so lots of information there.
Two items. The first is, and I made some comments earlier on, is the ice rink. Just for, crystal clarity, I'm not opposed. I'm not holding back the ice rink folks from doing anything. If they have the money and they want to go out and they want to build what they've come up with as an idea on that property and they get city approval to do it, they can do that tomorrow. But folks also need to understand that that proposal is a very recent iteration of something that was much different just 9 months ago. And no one has indicated to date that there is any money available privately through that organization or some entity thereof to do that project. My concern was very simple, that we included 20 or 30 different sports-oriented partners to participate in a very objective process to review this report that we received. And it would be unfair for the city to then select unilaterally, halfway through this process, a single entity or user that wasn't any further along than any of the other entities, except for having a venue in proximity. The soccer folks could make the same argument with the 3 fields, or the softball with their 3 fields, that property is equally available to a very similar idea that they might have. And so, folks need to understand that, I wasn't interested in interjecting that, and basically, the next thing that all those folks we asked to participate in this objective process read is that we've simply made a decision to head in a left direction, and leave them out in the cold, when we asked them to participate in the first place.
Well, they would have an opportunity now to respond to the RFQ.
That's
Right.
And
that's-
that would make it
That,
fair.
I think, is as equally fair as we can make it.
Yep.
The second item is, and I know that we discussed this a little bit last week, the Franklin Street issue. I don't know if anybody else gets comments on that, but I do on a regular basis from friends and family and folks I see in the community. It is clear and obvious that there is a growing conglomeration of personal effects being stored by individuals underneath that pass next to the police station. And I'll be very simple, I'm opposed to that happening. I think that it is disingenuous for us to have rules within this city that say you can set your trash can out at 4 p.m., it's got to be back in by 12 the next day, or that you can't set a couch out without notification to be picked up, or street closures for any one of these activities that happen in the A&E, happen in this manner, and then drive by that every day and then cite private properties, every day of the week, cite private properties, for exactly that type of appearance, but not do anything simply because it's within the public space. I don't think we operate that way.
But it is not just that, Councilman. It is not the same to call someone's personal belongings, who they are standing with, just like I would be holding my purse, as trash. It cannot be treated the same way as a trash set out.
They are not stood
just
with
cannot.
24 hours a day.
No, I
They're
know,
not.
but it cannot be, I've talked to the chief, I've talked to code, that is not the same as a trash set out.
So if I put a couch out on the
Couch is a trash
shoulder.
set out, someone's personal belongings next to
But
them.
if it's
is
mine, it's my
not.
personal belonging, and I set it out in front of my house in the public right away, and I decide to leave for 12 hours and come back, I should expect that couch to be there,
Yeah.
right?
No, because
Why?
that's different.
That's my personal
different than
belongings.
someone standing there with their personal belongings, a person. It's not trash.
I mean, the volume of those belongings are the size of these two tables at this point.
I understand what you're saying, but they're not being left there. They're not being just left there.
That doesn't make any sense. It just doesn't.
It's different.
Emily.
I don't have anything.
Cab Alexander, where we at on that situation up there on West Franklin Street?
Well, a member of the homeless coalition stopped there again today. I also spoke with the one lady that came today, and they're making progress with her. They got her applied. She got moved up on the housing list, and she's been able to apply for food stamps now. She didn't want to leave her property there. When they interviewed her the other day, we took her property over to headquarters.
All right, she's not leaving it.
Take custody of it. And I will tell you that we had a death under that bridge today. One of the homeless people died up there. It wasn't one of the regulars. Someone came over there and expired over on the bridge. We're making, we consider good progress. If we feel we can move this one lady out, there's another gentleman there that's asked for help. That the homeless coalition has the people right now to try to do one at a time. We get rid of those two people, get them in housing somewhere, we think our problem will be abated there. The other people you see there, a couple of them are there from the mission, the rescue mission, who sets people out for 30 days at a time, where they can go back in. The chief and I are gonna address that when he gets back next week, talk to the mission as to why they do that, or if they can't change their policy. So
Right.
the other visitor, one person's a visitor from the Walnut Street Towers that comes to visit these. So I feel we're making progress.
Good, thank you.
Can I make a comment?
Oh, I can go back to you, I guess. You had your chance, but go ahead.
I just, after talking with them and several other of the homeless people who have come and are now in more visible places, some of them are stating the reason they are now out in public and not in the woods in those facilities are because they are not drug users, and there is so much drug activity and needles in unsafe environments in the wooded areas. So I know all I talk about is the drug problem all the time, but this is another byproduct of addiction and what's happening in those woods. I literally had two homeless members that are now in visible public areas say that they felt unsafe in the wooded areas because of the amount of needles, because they were non-drug users. So this is just another byproduct of something that we're trying to work on solving. I don't think people are thinking of it that way, but, I mean, that's what happens.
Okay. All right. I don't have anything. We're adjourned.